On this week's episode of The Insider, Rob will take a look back at the Hanford City Council actions from last week and what's on the agenda for this week. We'll also see what's on the community calendar. Then, Hanford's own Tamara Keith joins us from Washington, D.C. to share with us what it's like working as a White House correspondent. This is the Hanford Insider for Monday, June 17th.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Hanford Insider. I'm your host, Rob Bentley. Thanks for listening. The weather this week is going to start out really nice with temperatures in the 90s, but as the week progresses, we'll see a return to the 100s by the weekend. Come out and say hi at the Thursday Night Marketplace this week. Eric and I'll be at the Hanford Insider booth to greet our listeners. It looks like the weather's going to be great, and we can't wait to see you. The band Soul Iconic will be providing the entertainment this week. In community news, on Thursday, after getting some tips about an illegal fireworks operation, the Hanford Police and Fire Department searched a home in South Hanford, and officers found stacks of packaged illegal fireworks, some of which were labeled to sell. They also found materials used to make homemade fireworks, a ghost gun, and an MK-76 practice bomb. 33-year-old Ryan Branch was booked on multiple charges into the Kings County Jail and has since been released on bond. During this press conference on Friday, both Police Chief Stephanie Huddleston and Fire Chief Daniel Perkins emphasized that Hanford has a zero tolerance for illegal fireworks, and that if you see something, please say something, and they will follow up on the tip as they did with this arrest. If you get caught using illegal fireworks, the fines are steep, but the danger of injury and damage is even greater. Speaking of law enforcement, how about a big shout out to Deputy Dave Calhoun, who recently retired from the Kings County Sheriff's Office. Thank you for your 30 years of service. Have a happy and healthy retirement, Dave. In community news, the Hanford City Council held a special meeting last Tuesday to receive final information regarding the proposed revenue measure for consideration to be placed on the November ballot. Of the current 7.25% sales tax, 87% of it is sent to Sacramento. As presented by the Revenue Measure Committee and city staff, all of the additional 1% sales tax would stay here in Hanford to fund things like a new safety building, increasing the number of police and fire personnel so that the departments can become more proactive instead of reactive, repair and replace worn-out roads we're driving on, improve our local parks and expanding opportunities for children and youth, expanding code enforcement and abatement, particularly when it comes to the unhoused community, and addressing ongoing issues in various city-owned buildings such as deferred AC upgrades and replacements, drainage issues, plumbing issues, security issues, and structural issues. These priorities were reviewed by the 13-member Revenue Measure Committee this spring, over 10 study sessions with over 20 hours of research. The plan was then presented to the City Council a month or so ago. At Tuesday's meeting, the Council also received information from Randall Communications about how to go about educating the public about the measure. Initial surveys that have been conducted indicate support for the tax measure. At this Tuesday's meeting, the Council will formally adopt the draft ballot language, resolution, and ordinances, which will include a citizen oversight committee. I would encourage everyone to educate themselves by reading the materials on the city website and not make decisions solely based on what you read on social media. In my interview with Tamara Keith in just a moment, you'll actually hear why we think depending on social media for your news intake isn't such a good idea. Subscribers to my email list will also be getting an additional attachment that contains direct links to the documents outlining the proposed revenue measure. You can watch Tuesday's City Council meeting in person or online at cityofhanfordca.com. Here are some things coming up on our community calendar. The King's Art Center presents Yosemite Renaissance Wednesday through Fridays from 12 to 5 and Saturdays 10 to 3. For more information, visit kingsartcenter.org. The County Elections Department is holding a Candidate Information Night this Wednesday, June 19th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. This is a great opportunity for those community members interested in running for City Council, school boards, and special district offices in the November 5th general election. The Kings County Law Enforcement 5K Run and Walk for Special Olympics will be held this Saturday at the Kings County Government Center at 9 a.m. Also this Saturday, Hanford's own Dani Stacy, who recently appeared on NBC's The Voice, will be performing in concert at the Hanford Fox Theater. Get your tickets at foxhanford.com. Kings County Community Action Organization is having a summer block party at their main office on 11th Avenue on Friday, June 28th. From 9 a.m. to noon, there'll be games, children's activities, Head Start enrollments, community resources, a vaccination clinic, and refreshments. Visit kcao.org for more information. If you have an event coming up and you'd like some help getting the word out, let's work together. Send your information to hanfordinsider@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter to get a complete calendar of events. Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome to the show Tamara Keith, who is a former Hanford resident who is now working in National Public Radio and a White House correspondent. Welcome to the show, Tamara.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Tamara, we've got so much to cover today, but let's start kind of with your roots in Hanford, how your family came to Hanford. I know a lot of people will probably remember your father as a drama teacher at Hanford High School, but can you kind of walk us through your education in Hanford and then how you made your way to Washington, D.C.?
So what my parents like to say is that we were living in L.A., and they couldn't buy a house, and we'd been renting my entire childhood, and so we were coming up on fourth grade, and my parents like to say that they drove until they could afford a place to live, until they could afford to buy a house. And they found Hanford, and they thought it was extremely charming, and my dad was able to get a job at the high school teaching English and theater, and he also taught speech at College of the Sequoias, and Mom did a little occasional classroom music teaching, like choir and singing songs and banging things probably. So that's how we got there when I was in fourth grade, and the family stayed oddly until I graduated from high school, and then my parents followed me to college, which is weird, but
So
it has what it is. They did. I have a brother. He's younger, but they just keep following me. So they live out here now.
So one of the interviews that I heard with you a few years back was talking about how the impression of listening to the NPR broadcasts in the car radio kind of inspired you to what you're doing now.
Absolutely. So when we lived in LA, I was an actor, a child actor. I wasn't a very successful one, certainly, but we would have to drive all over LA to go to auditions. And so my parents started me very early on public radio, but I don't think it really sunk in. I liked it and that it was going to be a part of who I was for my entire life until we were living in Hanford and we found a church that we liked in Fresno. And so every Sunday we would drive to Fresno listening to Weekend Edition Sunday, go to church, go to Tower Records, maybe go to a movie, and then, definitely Costco, and then come back to Hanford. As I understand it, there is probably now a Costco in Hanford, which blows my mind.
Yeah, it's a popular one. So tell us about your journey through the school at Cal Berkeley and kind of how you found your way to Washington, D.C. with NPR.
Well, I guess that my ultimate path to Washington, D.C. began on the first day of classes at Cal. In my very first class, my very first day, I met a very nice boy. And he is my husband. And, it was funny because I told him what I wanted to do when I grew up, which was work for NPR, maybe if I was lucky, cover the White House. He said he wanted to be a veterinary oncologist, which was sort of random, but sure. And we did what we said we wanted to do. And I think partially it's because we had each other that we were able to do that. So it was a long and winding road that actually brought me back to the Valley for a while. My first job out of grad school, I covered the entire Central Valley for the California Report on KQED Public Radio. And then in 2008, my husband got a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institutes of Health. And he thought that I would just be able to show up in Washington, D.C. and get a job at NPR and everything would be great and that this would be a perfect plan. And I thought he was nuts. and basically cried my way across America as we drove moving out to Washington, D.C. And then I got a job at NPR and everything's worked out really great. I mean, there were like layoffs in between and all kinds of other things that happened in minor dramas. But ultimately, moving to D.C. and showing up on their doorstep worked out pretty well.
That's great. So you've been there a while, and you've been working White House correspondent here since 2014. What are you currently doing?
I cover the White House. I'm NPR Senior White House correspondent. And so that means that when President Biden went to France, I went to France and got very little sleep. But that's the most recent thing that I've been working on is his trip to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And it was absolutely moving to see these 95, 98, 105-year-old veterans who made it out to Normandy for this commemoration and still going strong, and just the opportunity to see them being honored. Never mind that there were politicians there and world leaders and Steven Spielberg and whoever else, Tom Hanks. But I got to meet one of the veterans, and it is the absolute highlight of that trip. And that actually had nothing to do with my journalism. I just ran into him in a hallway at a hotel, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're that guy.
So obviously a lot of travel. Can you tell us about maybe some of the highlights, experiences that you've had traveling to these different destinations with the administration?
Yeah, and I will say that most of the time, I'm not traveling to the amazing foreign countries or exotic lands. A lot of the time, I'm traveling to Iowa or during primary season, and I love Iowa. Or I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Wisconsin in the next 5 months, and North Carolina and other swing states. But like one of the highlights, I guess. It was a foreign trip, and it was a surprise trip. So it's not a surprise to the president that he's going on the trip, but it's a surprise to everyone else in the world. And so I got called. It was during the Trump administration. I think it was December of 2018. He hadn't yet visited any of the U.S. troops serving in war zones. Isn't quite the right word, because Iraq and Afghanistan had moved to somewhat more stable situations, but he hadn't been to either of those countries. And so they decided that he was going to go on Christmas Day to Iraq. And so I got a call like 3 days before that saying, come into the White House, don't bring any electronics. Brought just a notebook into Press Secretary Sarah Sanders' office, and was basically told, you're going to meet at Joint Base Andrews at a specific time, and this is what you bring, and you're going to Iraq. But we didn't know anything more than that. And I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. My parents, we were supposed to be traveling out for Christmas, had to change flights, had to do all kinds of things, because when the White House calls and says you're going to Iraq with the president, you drop everything and you go to Iraq with the president. And so it was, I could tell my husband and I could tell one editor, but I had to have those conversations in person without electronics nearby, which is totally wild. So that trip was a highlight and very intense. And then there are other trips that you'll never forget. Stopping at Dover Air Base for the dignified transfer of the remains of fallen service members. That experience will be seared in my mind forever. And I didn't go on the trip, but because at the time I was the president of the White House Correspondents Association, I was deeply involved in planning President Biden's secret trip to Ukraine. I mean, I didn't plan the logistics or anything like that, but I knew about it about 10 days before anyone else knew. And I got to pick which reporter went and which photographer went on the trip, and spent countless hours advocating to try to get more people, more reporters to be able to go, and then stayed awake for about 48 hours tracking the trip when nobody else knew that it was happening.
Yeah.
And I am happy that is no longer my responsibility, because that is some very intense responsibility.
I bet. So I think you brought up a really important point in there, is that you have been correspondent for a number of years and you're not necessarily affiliated with a campaign or another, is that you're covering it all. What are some of the challenges that you've faced in doing that, balancing your I guess personal opinions versus, it must be difficult sometimes, I would imagine.
Right. As you say, I started out covering the Obama administration towards the tail end. I covered Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. I covered a bit of Romney's presidential campaign, too, in 2012. Then I immediately had to sort of completely switch gears and cover the Trump White House. And that was quite a steep learning curve. But let's be honest, every new administration is a steep learning curve, both for them and for us. Getting sourced up is one of these things that's challenging, getting people to share information with you, figuring out who's reliable. That is a challenge with every administration. And the other thing is that it changes. People come and go in the White House, and then you're kind of starting over new, whether it's a new administration or just a new crop of people that have come into that administration. And, my joke is that in terms of personal opinions, I'm dead inside. That I try not to get emotionally involved in my work. Politics is something that a lot of people care passionately about, and that is essentially their hobby, right? They spend all their time fighting the good fight on the internet about their candidate or their politics. And, you will not catch me doing any of that in my private time. If I sometimes have friends who want to talk to me about politics because, I know things, and I'm just how are your kids doing? It's just, I just don't want to do it. It's my job, and it's not my hobby, and it's not my life. But obviously, I'm very interested in politics, but also the mechanics of it, and the personalities and all of those things. But just in terms of how I feel about various people, I obviously everyone has feelings, but I do my best to inspect my work and make sure it's fair before it goes out.
So that brings up a really good point. We're in the 2024 election cycle, and there's a lot of information and misinformation out there regarding, different scenarios and different feelings that people have about particular policies and such. How can we, as the voters, put our trust in the media to report fair and accurate information?
Well, that's if I could solve that, then maybe we could solve a lot of problems. But what I would say is that I know that the mainstream media gets denigrated a lot by a lot of people on both the left and the right. But we're really the only ones whose job it is to get things right. We're really the only ones whose job it is to make our stories fair. And obviously you need to check your sources, check the bias. If you're looking at the editorial page of any newspaper, it's either going to be liberal or it's going to be conservative. It's going to be the Wall Street Journal editorial page or the Washington Post editorial page. I don't like reading the editorial page because I don't think we should be in the opinion business. I think we can do analysis, but that needs to be based on reporting and journalism and not based on feels. And, those of us who are professional journalists take that responsibility very seriously. And I don't know how we restore trust. The only thing that I know how to do is keep doing what I'm doing, try to do better every day. When somebody has a complaint about my story, take it seriously. Think about if I would have done something differently or if I should do something differently. I'll just give you an example. I had a story that I did about President Biden when he was in France visiting this World War I cemetery that former President Trump had not visited. He was supposed to visit, and then there was rain, and rather than taking a motorcade, he just bailed on it. And there had been reporting in multiple outlets that he had called the war dead suckers and losers at various times around that trip. And so I did a story based on that. I reached out to people who had worked in the Trump administration, got, one source confirming it, plus the other reports that existed. And another source that said, like, the statement I put out refuting it back in 2020 when I worked in the Trump White House was totally untrue and not based on facts. And so I felt pretty confident with all of the couching of, that Trump has not publicly admitted to this or anything, but felt pretty good with the story and thought it was fair, and it was fair. But then the Trump campaign reached out after it had already posted and said, hey, we've got a new statement. This thing is a total fabrication. Can't believe Joe Biden would do this. And so I added to my story. I added more of their perspective to the story because they had put out this new statement, because I do want my story to be fair. So that's just sort of an example of it, I guess. But it is a challenging time. It's not just that people don't trust the mainstream media. It's that they don't trust any institutions. There's less connectiveness. People are less connected to religion and to churches. They're less connected to their communities. Our worlds have gotten so much smaller, and it's just this thing that the algorithm has fed us, and it may be that the algorithm is feeding you more of this thing that makes you angry because you'll keep looking at it. And it's not making us healthier or better or more engaged in our communities. And I'm really worried about it. But of course, your podcast is trying to break through some of that. And, obviously what I do is trying to break through some of that. And all we can do is our best.
Yep. So you've certainly had some great experiences and some frustrating experiences in your position. But what are some highlights, some things that you're most proud of what you've been able to do there?
Well, this is not something I'm most proud of. So a great highlight, great way to start. I just have to say it's actually really, really cool to get to fly on Air Force One. The hours are often miserable and there are lots of downsides, but it is just getting to fly on Air Force One, walking into the United States Capitol and walking up to the White House on any day. I am just still a little bit awestruck by the opportunity that I have to report on these institutions and on the American government. So I guess every day I get to do my job, and I feel really privileged to be able to do that. The funny thing about this job is it's like 51st States or something. Every day is a blank slate. It's it's sort of yes, you're covering this one beat, the White House, and yet every day it could be something different. One day you're reporting on something going on in Yemen and you didn't even know that there were Houthi rebels until you started hearing about them in the White House press briefing. And, the next day it's about school nutrition or something, or shortages of baby milk powder. So, okay, two highlights. One, it goes back to my days reporting in the Central Valley, a couple of favorite stories. One was about bee theft. That was very fun, and I think I got a lot of puns in that one. Mm-hmm. And the other one was I don't remember exactly where it was. It was a little further north in the valley, but at some point, California overtook Wisconsin as the dairy capital of the country, and I think even the cheese capital. But I went to this facility that was making these gigantic blocks of cheddar cheese that were then being powderized to be sprayed onto Doritos. And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I mean, how weird is that? But I guess what I will say is that my recent career highlight was after October 7th, I was in the small pool of reporters. So there's only 13 reporters who fly with the president on Air Force One, go wherever he goes. We're called the protective pool. And we share our reporting. I share the audio with the rest of the press corps. And it was a real highlight to get to report on President Biden's trip to Israel just less than 2 weeks after October 7th. And it was a 31-hour trip where our heads did not hit pillows. And it is the only time he has come back in his entire presidency, come back on Air Force One to talk to the press on the plane. President Trump did it all the time, mostly off the record. But this is the first time Biden came back. And the story I did based on that trip ended up winning an award, which was very exciting because I never win anything. So we're going to call that a highlight. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about your downtime, which I'm sure you value quite a bit. What are some activities that you enjoy when you unplug?
So I have two boys. They are 6 years old and 11 years old. And I am very proud of them and spend time with them in my downtime. I also like to run and ride my bike and do exercise, which is kind of hilarious because in high school, I figured out a way to get PE credit for marching band. And now all I do is exercise because people are like, oh, I need to exercise for, so I can lose weight or so that I can eat more. And I'm like, no, I need to exercise so I can stay sane. It is like those endorphins, that just like release of going on a run, that is absolutely essential to surviving life in my mind. So that's what I do to unwind. And I just have to say, I'm so proud of my older son. He has been playing guitar and he just had a concert, and like a rock concert, and it was not terrible.
The power of music.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Tamara, it's been so awesome having you on the show today. Can you give us some of the social sites that we could follow to kind of keep up with you? I know you have the podcast, which is the NPR Politics podcast. What are some things that you're involved in on social media?
Yeah, so the NPR Politics podcast is available wherever you get podcasts, and I'm one of 4 hosts, so I'm not always on, but sometimes I'm on, and it's always good, I swear. And it's a great way to get an overview of what's going on in politics without having to consume it from a fire hose, like you might in other venues. And then basically on every social platform that I'm on, I am Tamara Keith NPR.
Awesome. And I know you have the Monday, what is the Monday?
Yes, I'm on PBS NewsHour on Mondays. It's the Politics Monday segment, and they also distribute that as a podcast. And it's up on YouTube as well. I haven't gotten into TikTok, and I don't know that it's going to happen. I'm going to wait and see if they actually get banned in America before I get attached.
Well, Tamara, once again, thank you for being on the show, and we're looking forward to seeing you in February of 2025. You'll be speaking at the local high schools regarding your career path, and an inspiration for so many. And I want to wish you a safe and healthy summer. I know you're going to be taking some time off, and especially with the election cycle coming up, I know it's going to get even more crazy. So thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Hanford was a big part of putting me where I am, so I feel grateful.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's show. Tune in next week as we'll hear from Debbie Gibson from United Cerebral Palsy of Central California. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Hanford Insider. If you'd like to join the Hanford Insider email list, stop by my website at hanfordinsider.com to sign up for updates. You'll also get an exclusive copy of my newsletter in your inbox each week. You can also send me feedback by voicemail through my website by clicking on the microphone icon. I'd love to hear from you. Your comments may even be shared on the show. Also need your help getting the word out about the show by liking and sharing on social media or telling a friend. For more information about the show, you can find this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and YouTube at Hanford Insider. If you have a show idea, be sure to email me at hanfordinsider@gmail.com and I'll look into it. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.